Okay, we're good. All right, welcome to the Week 8 Balanced Scorecard lecture in the Management Accounting 2 course. We want to talk about a strategy, why companies decide on a particular strategy and not another. Once we know their particular strategy, then we're interested in how they manage that strategy. And what I'm introducing to you in this class are different strategies that companies choose in order to compete in markets. And once they've chosen a strategy, what type of performance measurement systems they might use. We use the framework, we introduce the framework of the balanced scorecard to help enable us to understand the different types of performance measures that companies may emphasize depending on the strategies that they choose. So we're going to talk about the strategies that companies take. For example, whether it's cost leadership, product differentiation, or product focus, which can be a combination of one or the other, or separate. We're also going to look at how, in a more in-depth example, how companies manage a particular strategy. So we're using the in-depth example of Chipset, which is in the chapter. It has a cost leadership strategy. They make an IC product, and we're looking at how Chipset manages that strategy. And we refer back to what we covered in activity-based costing and value engineering. Now remember, we had this diagram of the activity-based management model where activity-based costing was on one side and on the other side was value engineering. And we're able to break that down into product value analysis and product design. And then under that we had functional analysis and we had design analysis. And through working through process value analysis or through design analysis or functional analysis, we were able to manage the costs in the organization much more effectively. And it may be that this part here we introduce as a way for Chipset to help execute its cost leadership strategy. So we will briefly introduce Chipset, its cost leadership strategy, and bring in an example of how value engineering can be used to help execute on the cost leadership strategy. All of that is probably the first half of today's lecture. Then we're going to introduce our big, hairy framework, the balanced scorecard. And we all know about the balanced scorecard, don't we? And it's looking at the balance between financial and non-financial performance measures, and also the balance between the past and the future. And we all know that accounting numbers are an economic representation of the past, not of the future. So we need to have some other measures in the scorecard to give us some indications for the future. For example, learning and growth measures. Given the limited time of today's lecture, we will focus on the balanced scorecards, its concept, in terms of the SMS formula which I introduced. That is, balanced scorecard is defined as a combination of strategy, measurement, and systems thinking. And we talk about that in today's lecture. And finally, we focus on the financial performance measures of the balanced scorecard. Remember, there are 4 perspectives: financial, there is the customer, there's internal, process, and learning and growth. We will focus on the financial perspective and then relate that, the financial perspective, to Chipset again in its management of a cost leadership strategy. And this is where, under the financial perspective, we are focusing on productivity, growth, and price. And so for Chipset, having a cost leadership strategy, they're going to focus a lot on productivity and they're going to focus a lot on growth, but not so much on price. And the reason is they're focusing on cost leadership. They don't really have that pricing power to actually execute a differentiated product strategy in the market. They don't have the products that give them the pricing power. Other companies that have a differentiated strategy do have that pricing power, and so they're looking for financial performance measures that give them feedback on how they're going in the market based on their pricing power. So therefore, price performance measures become more important for a differentiated strategic focused firm, and also growth performance metrics are important and not so much on the productivity. So we have productivity and growth being a focus of Chipset, which is focusing on a cost leadership. We have price and growth being focused on a differentiated company, a product differentiated company following differentiated strategy. So there we have the 4 parts of today's lecture. What is a strategy? Why do firms choose a certain strategy? We look at generic types, cost, differentiation, and product focus. Then we look in more detail, how do you manage a particular strategy? And we introduce Chipset as our example. We introduce the concept of the balanced scorecard that is widely used in organizations around the world. We use the SMS, an acronym to define the balanced scorecard, that is strategy, measurement, and systems thinking. And finally, we give an example of one perspective of the balanced scorecard, that is the financial perspective, and what type of measures are likely to give feedback on the execution of strategy. And we relate the financial perspective in terms of Chipset's cost leadership strategy, and they're focusing on productivity and growth metrics. And that's today's lecture. In the next week, we're going to be focusing on quality measures that are used in organisations to help support their strategy, which is another perspective of the balanced scorecard. Thank you very much.